What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. I am really excited. I got somebody on the channel that I've been waiting to have on for a long time. A lot of my subscribers have been asking me to reach out to him, and he's got a great channel over there. Link will be in the description below, of course. Bengal does a great job. He's a big Giants fan, and just want to introduce you first. And what's going on, man? Thanks for coming on the channel.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate you. Big Giants fan. I'm excited to dive into it. It's been a dumpster fire over the past few years. Hopefully it's trending in the other direction, but we'll see.
Yeah, tell me. I started YouTube the year after right after the Saquon Barkley draft. So it's ever since I've been on, it has been a complete dumpster fire. You told me you started about 5 years ago with your new channel, so it's pretty much been a dumpster fire for you the entire time as well.
You know, that playoff appearance in 2016, that was a farce. Giants won 11 games that year with one of the worst point differentials of any playoff team, and they got one of the worst playoff games I can even remember against the Packers in the wild card. I think it was brutal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that whole first half, that game, I mean, I was watching.
Like 6-6 or something like that?
Yeah, and I'm watching the game, and I'm saying Giants will be up by 10 points. And you just kept letting the Packers hang around, and then the defense just completely fell apart with the Hail Mary before the half. And like you said, though, it's been a complete mess. And that year, I think we could both agree, was kind of, like you said, a soft schedule, and we barely beat teams. Not to mention, Jerry Reese kind of was a one-year fix with the way he went out there and he spent on free agency, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this year's free agency period as well. But that's what I liked about the team this year in terms of the offseason. They didn't really look at a short-term fix. They kind of were cost-effective in the way they spent their money. Yeah, I know they spent $15 million a year on Bradbury, but it was a 3-year deal. You could get out after 2. Same could be said for Martinez. I think they were kind of long-term thinking. Even if you didn't love the players they brought in, they weren't looking for quick fixes. They're thinking long-term with the way they operated this offseason. That's what I liked.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think Bradbury was definitely the gem of free agency, and Blake Martinez was really bad in Green Bay, but he's going to be playing a different role, most likely in this new defense that the Giants have set up. So when he was in Green Bay, he was playing, farther off the line, and he wasn't really forced to make plays in the box and near the line of scrimmage, and they had him back in coverage a lot, which is not really his game. So if they have him as more of a thumper near the line of scrimmage where he can make plays and bring the ball carrier down in the backfield or near the line, I think he's going to be in a position for success. So not good in Green Bay, but who knows? Untapped potential potentially with the Giants here for the next few years.
Yeah, I was reading an article where Martinez was talking about that, how he felt last year specifically he didn't like the way he was used, and I think part of that might have been the reason they brought in Zadarius and Preston Smith. They're getting more pressure on the quarterback, and they asked him to kind of lay back more. He didn't like that. I think he blitzed 65 times in 18 and only like 23 times last year, and he said that he didn't like that new role. He liked the way he played with Patrick Graham, so we'll see what Graham could get out of him. Obviously, Graham thinks he could fit the scheme well.
Mm-hmm.
But what did you think of the coaching staff as a whole? And we'll start with Joe Judge. What did you think of the hiring of Joe Judge by the New York Giants? A little bit of a surprise, I would think, when you first heard about it. But what did you think of the hiring?
It's an interesting one. That's clearly following the trend of what a lot of the other NFL teams have been doing, bringing in these younger guys with, untapped potential, guys who have played under, experienced and very successful coaches. Joe Judge with a background at Alabama, with obviously the New England Patriots, two of the most successful programs in all of football over the past 2 decades. So he clearly has had the experience and has learned from some of the best coaches in NFL and college football history, but we don't know what he can do as a head coach. We don't know whether he can command a locker room, but he's experienced winning, and I'd like to experience winning as a Giants fan. So it was a bit of a surprise for sure, but I'm excited for the potential that he offers more than Ben McAdoo, for example.
Oh, God.
Terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with you. It was a bit of a surprise when you really read into him. I liked a lot of the things that I read. Like you said, the exposure to both Saban and Belichick. He seems like a smart guy going to get his doctorate degree, but I'm not going to fully buy into him or anybody on the coaching staff before we see them go out there and win football games. Like you said, we've been duped before. I even was kind of like the Shermer hire when we first made it because I looked at him as a quarterback guru. I thought he'd be a guy that maybe fixes Eli Manning, had a lot of success with Keenum the year before, or whichever quarterback they would bring in, which, to Shermer's credit in that aspect, I thought he did a pretty good job with Daniel Jones, but obviously wasn't a good head coach. But like you said, I think with Judge, we have to take a wait-and-see approach and see how he does. But I do like some of the things he said about this football team. Seems like they're trying to get back to Giants values, as well as some of the coaches that they brought in. Let's talk about the staff underneath Judge in regards to, not just Garrett and Graham, but the staff as a whole. Who are some of the guys that you like that they brought in for the New York Giants?
I'm going to take a kind of curveball approach here, and I'm going to say I didn't mind the Jason Garrett hire. Of course, he was awesome to go up against as a head coach in Dallas because he was completely inept. But this is a guy with a huge, offensive background, backup quarterback in the league for a number of years. Smart guy, went to Princeton, local to the area in that New Jersey area as well. And Jason Garrett has experience being a head coach, and for a first-year head coach in, Joe Judge, maybe Jason Garrett can offer some potential insight. Even if he wasn't a fantastic head coach for the Cowboys, he does have that experience, and experience is valuable. And this is a guy who can potentially lead this offense back in a more subdued role potentially. So I'm excited for that. And, the worst thing to me about Pat Shurmur is this guy's complete lack of anything resembling desire to win the game. Punting on 4th and 2 from midfield. And that was consistent. The Giants just didn't want to win at any point. They were playing to stay in the game. They were playing not to lose. And that's not going to be successful in the NFL. You got to play to win. And aggressiveness is time and time again the number one thing that leads team to games, other than coaching overall on the roster, is actually staying aggressive and not giving in. And the Giants just gave up in the third quarter and in the fourth quarter so many times last year that led to them having one of the worst records in the league.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up about Shurmur. I remember the game you're talking about, and there were several other instances. I was at the Jet-Giant game. That was another one where he used all 3 timeouts before the 3-minute mark. His usage of the timeouts late in games was abysmal. The other thing, obviously, with the DeAndre Baker falling asleep in meetings, you heard that after the fact. Didn't seem like the biggest disciplinarian. Let's put it that way. It didn't really keep his players in check. Now, of course, you heard after the fact that Saquon Barkley liked him, Daniel Jones liked him, but what are they supposed to say? They're rookies. They're trying to stick up for their coach. But overall, Shurmur was just a complete disaster as a head coach. There's no denying that. And that's one thing that I think Judge is going to be a lot better at. Exactly what you pointed out, the late game, in-game decision-making, because everything you hear about this guy, first off, he's got experience on both sides of the ball, which you like, right? And the other thing that I never really thought about when they hired him, being a special teams coach, he kind of has to get the most out of the players that barely make the roster. So that's his job, and hopefully he brings that as a head coach. But he seems like a guy that pays a lot of attention to detail. Everything you hear about him, everything you say. So I would think that would translate to in-game situations like you just said. The late-game timeouts, things like that. Clock management, which is, 101 for a head coach. That's one of the most important things that Pat Shurmur was horrible at. So I would think in that aspect, I'm anticipating that Joe Judge will be much better.
Yeah, I hear you on that for sure.
But and in terms of Garrett, I'm in complete agreement with you. I actually like him when you see what he got out of Dak Prescott, when you see what he got out of Tony Romo. He's been a solid offensive coordinator throughout his entire career, and there's no reason to think he can't bring that. What do you think of the other side of the ball with Patrick Graham? What do you think he'll bring?
Patrick Graham is another, guy who represents aggressiveness, and that's what you want from a defense. And the Giants have kind of a lack of ability to put pressure on the quarterback with their current personnel. You look at the defensive line; they run the base 3-4 front. They have basically nose tackles across the defensive line, playing on either side of Dalvin Tomlinson, because Leonard Williams played that role at USC, and Dexter Lawrence played that role at Clemson. They were playing in the 1 or the 0 tech pretty much over the center, and now they've been asked to move to the side in a more pass rushing type of ability there, or type of role. So those aren't 3 guys that can get a ton of pressure on the quarterback. And then when you look on the edge, there's not a whole lot there. They signed Kyler Fackrell. It looks like he's going to be starting, who is not exactly the most proficient pass rusher. I know he put up double-digit sacks a few years ago. That was really more of the system and the players around him and taking advantage of the situation more than it is individual skill. So I'm not exactly super hyped up on Kyler Fackrell. I like what O'Shane Ximines can do. not convinced that he's an every down pass rusher, more of a situational guy. Kind of the same deal with Lorenzo Carter, who I really hope takes a step up this year. But they don't have a ton of edge rushers. But in the correct scheme and in the really aggressive front that Patrick Graham is known for, I think these guys can be in a position to put pressure on the QB. And that's what has won the Giants Super Bowls in the past. When you look at, Justin Tuck and Osi Umenyiora and, some of those great teams with those great defensive linemen, specifically on the edge, who knows what Graham is capable of in coaching these guys up and turning them into proficient players.
Yeah, you bring up Lorenzo Carter. He's a guy I'm excited about. Now, I'm in agreement with you that I don't think there's an elite pass rusher on this team. There's just not. And you see the rumors about Golden maybe coming back. They tendered him. We'll have to wait and see if team offers him, I think, more than $5 or $5.5 million before July 22nd. But even he, I think, is a system-dependent player. I think he was brought here due to the fact the Arizona Cardinals, he had some success with Betcher. But you go back, you look at the tape, it wasn't like he was, it was kind of, a lot of them were coverage sacks, things like that. I'm not in love with Golden. I think he would be a situational pass rusher if you brought him back. Carter's a guy I think has a lot of upside. And last year I was a little bit disappointed, but when you go back, you read some of the things, the way the Giants used him, he wasn't used exclusively as a pass rusher. They used him a lot in coverage. They used him up at the line of scrimmage. It'll be interesting to see because I do think he brings a lot of versatility, how Patrick Graham implements him. He's one of the players I'm really excited about this year that I think could burst out. Not to mention his former linebacker coach from Georgia is on the New York Giants staff with Sure, so maybe he'll have something to do with getting the most out of this kid because I do think Lorenzo Carter is one of the guys on this defense who has the capability of taking a big jump this year.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Great athlete. He was used in a lot of different ways at Georgia. If he can really just focus on maybe one aspect, he can develop into becoming a monster for this team. And the Giants haven't had a solid linebacker as a whole in the last decade, really. I mean, the best one that comes to mind is probably John Beeson, and he was
like a half a year. Yeah. Our best linebacker since I've been watching, Antonio Pierce is really our last good, consistent linebacker.
And that was in what, 2009 was the last time he was on the team, 2008 maybe?
Yeah, it's been a while.
So, yeah.
It's been way too long, and hopefully Blake Martinez could take that role. We thought Ogletree would when they first brought him in. He was a complete disaster. Let's get into some of that. Some of the players that are now released by the Giants and some of the guys that they brought in. Obviously, Gettleman came in. Let's talk a little bit about that because I've never talked to you about your thought process on the New York Giants' new regime. We talked a little bit about Jerry Reese and how he, went on a spending spree to give us that 1 year in 2016, set us up for disaster in 17. Then 18, Gettleman comes in. Ogletree's part of that. Bad trade. Ogletree makes a lot of money. It was a bad trade, no doubt about it. I think they gave up a fourth and a sixth. And the 2018 offseason was a disaster. Now, one thing I try to be fair. Gettleman was strapped for cash. They had $30 million in cap space, and he tried to fix that offensive line. Nate Solder was the best available left tackle at the time. Hasn't worked out. That draft, and I like the 19 draft, and I like this draft. The 2018 draft doesn't look as good as it initially did, in my opinion. It's still a solid draft, but Lillette is off the team. R.J. McIntosh has barely played, even though I still think he could be solid. We'll see what we got with Hill. He kind of regressed last year. Like we both said, I still like Lorenzo Carter. I want to get your thoughts on Hernandez, how he played last year. Are you a little concerned with what most people perceived was a little bit of a regression? And your thoughts on the Saquon Barkley pick the day of the draft. Were you in favor of them taking Barkley at 2? Or would you have preferred that the New York Giants went quarterback there or possibly traded down?
That's a really interesting question because I advocate all the time for, the stoppage of overdrafting running backs because it is the most replaceable position in football, really, of all the starting positions. And so many guys can come in, whether it be, 4th, 5th, 6th round. We've seen guys have gone undrafted. And you look at Phillip Lindsay for the Broncos, for example, undrafted out of Colorado, heads to the Broncos. And did he lead the league in rushing 2 seasons ago?
He was up there, yeah.
Yes, so many guys can come in out of nowhere and really play that role. You don't necessarily need to spend a first or even a second round pick on that position. But Saquon Barkley was the best player in the draft, in my opinion, in 2018. I didn't really love the quarterbacks too much. Baker Mayfield was solid. He was off the board at number 1. He regressed last season too. And then Lamar Jackson had a lot of question marks there in terms of consistency, even though he had all the traits and all the ability and clearly has lived up to that now after he won an MVP, but was not big on Darnold. He hasn't done anything in the NFL so far. was not big on Josh Allen. He continues to be one of the most overrated players in the NFL. Josh Rosen was a player with a low ceiling, a low ceiling and a high floor. And it seems like he hasn't even lived up to that high ceiling at the moment. He, was off Arizona. Now it's looking to be the third string quarterback on Miami. So I wasn't really a pro QB in that spot. I think the only two options were Saquon and Quentin Nelson. And I don't know that you really take a guard that high either. So the Giants just went for best player available. Saquon's a monster. He can impact so many different areas of the game, whether it be as a runner or a receiver. So I like Saquon quite a bit. I wouldn't want him off the team, even if he wasn't necessarily worth the draft pick at number 2. Saquon's unbelievable. Sometimes you have to go best player available. I think Will Hernandez is a very solid player in general. Mahler in the run game has developed as a pass blocker. And some players are going to take a step back when the team is so terrible and they, rose up to an ability maybe faster than you would have initially thought. I mean, he was a guy coming from UTEP, which is not exactly a power program for producing players. And he adjusted to the NFL lifestyle pretty quickly, I thought, in terms of how good he became so quickly. So I don't think he was particularly bad last year. I'm fine with Will Hernandez. I like what they have with Kevin Zeitler on the opposite guard spot. And they drafted 2 tackles this year who I was really excited about because not only is Andrew Thomas a solid player at Georgia, I loved Matt Pert coming out of UConn. So if he can be that future right tackle for the Giants, Nate Solder's not even in the picture in 2 years, So the Giants are going to have money. They're going to have young talent across the offensive line. Kevin Zeitler maybe being the one exception, and who knows what's happening with center at the moment. But I like the Giants 2018 draft class as a whole. I think B.J. Hill in the right role as a situational 3-4 end coming in can be a good player. He was so good as a rookie.
He was.
And then wasn't really particularly noticeable on the field last year. But I like the Giants 2018 class. Their depth pickups, in the later rounds weren't too good in hindsight. I mean, but who knew Lauletta was going to get into this off the field stuff?
Yeah, it's true.
With the cops. Yeah. And I mean, you never know with some of these guys. But I'm excited about 2018. The draft class still, I think they did pretty well. It's really rare to hit on, 3 or 4 players in one draft. And I think the Giants probably did that. They hit on Hernandez, Saquon, and I want to say B.J. Hill based on his rookie performance, but Lorenzo Carter still maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I like 2018. Excited about 2019. I don't know. What do you think about this past year's class?
Yeah, I just want to speak a little bit more about what you said about Barkley. Obviously, I'm a huge Saquon Barkley fan. I'm wearing his jersey. He's my favorite player in the league. I was in favor of taking him there where we did. I would have preferred a trade down, but you can't assume that there was a deal there. Had we been able to trade down to 5 and get Nelson there or Chubb there or Barkley there, I don't think Barkley would have gotten there. I think the Browns would have taken him at 4. But had that happened, that might have been ideal had you been able to accrue more assets. But staying at 2, I am in complete agreement with you. I think Barkley was the right pick. I think he's a once-in-a-generational player that sometimes you can't pass up. Even though running back, like you said, is one of the least important positions on a football team, he is that talented, and I think he's going to make Daniel Jones' life that much easier. And as far as Hernandez goes, my thought process on him when people ask me about him, because you look at PFF, his grade dropped. The Giants' offensive line as a whole, though, last year was a complete disaster. And I think the regression in Nate Solder's play, they obviously play on the same side. I think that hurt Hernandez. Not to mention, nobody talks about this, and I don't try to bash Daniel Jones. I think Daniel Jones is going to be a good quarterback. He's a rookie quarterback. And he's still learning the game. He was thrown in there after 2 games. He's got to learn pre-snap reads, things like that. And I think that had a lot to do with the pressures as well. The fact that he wasn't accustomed to the NFL game yet. You look at the New York Giants offensive line last year, the first 2 games against the Bills and the Cowboys. They played pretty well with Eli under center. Daniel Jones comes in there. And I think that was part of the reason why the offensive line may not have played as well as we anticipated. Not that I thought they were a good offensive line, but I thought they were better than what the numbers indicated. As far as the 2019 draft class goes, right now it looks great. I mean, Daniel Jones at number 6. I didn't love it the night of the draft. I'll be the first to say it. But he definitely lived up to the billing, at least so far. I think he's got some upside. And Gettleman is looking smarter for not taking a quarterback in the previous year's class if Daniel Jones continues to build off of what he did last year. Dexter Lawrence looks like a good pick. On draft night, I wanted Montez Sweat. I'll be the first to admit that. But Dexter Lawrence looks like a good pick. I think he's only going to get better. DeAndre Baker, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with him. Probably wasn't the smartest idea to trade up for him based off the things that are now coming out about the pre-draft red flags, things like that. But in terms of the later picks, O'Shane Ximines in the late 3rd round, I think was a home run. Julian Love in the 4th round. Most people had him graded as a 2nd round, early 3rd round pick. And then you go out and you get you obviously the steal of the draft with Slayton. You get Conley, who looked really good before he got hurt his first 3 games. I thought the Giants did a terrific job last year. 18 was still a good draft. 19 I thought was a fantastic draft. I thought it was a absolute home run of a draft last year, and hopefully it only gets better, and then we'll get a little bit more into that, but I want to get your thoughts on the 19 draft class.
I'm maybe not as excited as you are about it. I hate to come on and talk about the Giants, and I'm usually a bit of a pessimist, but Daniel Jones as a rookie last year kind of did what you would expect out of a rookie quarterback, which was played pretty poorly, but had a lot of flashes, which is, you'll take that, 10 times out of 10. Because this is a guy who, by all advanced metrics, performed really, really poorly. But then he had, big games where he had 5 total touchdowns and no picks against terrible teams. You go, wow, that's amazing. Because the numbers purely on a touchdown interception basis were fantastic, but there's a whole lot more than that. And he was extremely raw as a rookie, but did show flashes. So you have a lot of potential there. Don't know what he's particularly going to bring for year 2, but for just stepping in and being thrown in there as a rookie, I like what Daniel Jones was capable of. I wasn't a huge fan of the Dexter Lawrence pick, and I'm still not really, because I can't advocate taking a nose tackle anywhere near the 1st round. But the Giants aren't playing him in that role, so I'm like, okay, that's a little bit better. The fact that he's going to be more of a defensive end over just playing over the center. So that's maybe a little bit better than I originally thought, because I thought he was going to play in that nose tackle role and Dalvin Tomlinson was going to kick over.
Who did you want there on draft night at 17?
Well, originally I wanted Brian Burns, and he went 1 pick before. I would have been a fan of Brian Burns at 6. I was in love with Brian Burns in the pre-draft process, and he was someone that quietly had a fantastic year last year. He was so good, and I can just imagine him flying off the edge for the Giants. Of course, he's on the Panthers now, and he had some injury concerns last year and still put up really, really solid numbers. So, I mean, Brian Burns would have been so nice, but I wanted the Giants so badly to address linebacker in some capacity, whether that was coming off the edge or more traditional inside linebacker, and they didn't do that. I wasn't in love with Montez Sweat. I thought he tested crazily but didn't necessarily play up to that speed. He's a good player with high upside, a lot because of that size and athleticism. But he wasn't, too technically amazing at Mississippi State. So, yeah, I wasn't. Oh man, Giants have to draft Montez.
I wanted Allen. I wanted Allen at 6. Allen was my guy in the whole pre-draft. That's why I was upset with Jones when they took him at 6. But I wanted Allen, and then at 17, I probably wanted a tackle. If you would have told me before the draft started, I want
Juwan Taylor.
I want Josh Allen and a tackle. Cody Ford, Juwan Taylor, Dillard. I wanted a tackle with Allen at 6 and 17 in an ideal scenario before the draft started.
Yeah, I thought Brian Burns was a much better prospect than Josh Allen was. And I feel like that was another thing that was just like a certain player gets hyped up for whatever reason. And I know that Josh Allen's numbers were better, but I mean, sacks in college are probably the most misleading statistic of a player's ability by about a country mile. And Brian Burns, just from a traits perspective, which is what you have to draft over, is traits over production. And not that Josh Allen wasn't a great athlete, because he was, and he did have the size as well. But Brian Burns, fantastic edge bend, litany of pass rush moves, adept in run defense. Brian Burns was like the complete edge prospect for me, and was like so close with Nick Bosa. So I don't know why Brian Burns was being so heavily slept on, I guess, as people are saying. But I wanted Brian Burns really, really badly, and when that didn't happen at 6, I was like, oh man, it didn't really matter who they took there, because I was going to be disappointed probably. But 2019, it was interesting. I don't think Ryan Connolly played well last year. I don't know where the whole this guy's fantastic came out of, because I think he had an interception or whatever. And people, just like with Alec Ogletree, because I saw in my comment section for 2 years how amazing Alec Ogletree is, and then they point to the interception numbers. And I'm like,
well, that I agree with, and I do, and I will say this about Conley. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, he only had 3 starts. when I went back and looked at the film, I do think Giant fans are overhyping Conley. I'll be the first to say it. I didn't expect him to play even remotely well, being that he was a fifth-round pick and everybody said he was going to be a special team specialist. I don't know if he's going to be a future starting middle linebacker in the league, but regardless, I think it was still good value where you got him in the fifth round, and he does seem to have a good nose for the ball. Now, in terms of coverage, things like that, that remains to be seen. I agree with you on that. I still have my question marks with Ryan Conley, but I think it was good value.
Yeah, I'll give you that for sure. But I mean, 2019, it looks solid, better than average for sure. I think the Giants did well, but when you have 3 first-round picks, you better do at least somewhat well in getting talent. But I just felt like, even though the Giants got solid players, I felt like they took just the wrong player at every possible turn. Like Dexter Lawrence, instead of taking a different player on the defensive side of the ball. When you trade up for a corner, you got DeAndre Baker and not Byron Murphy, not even Greedy Williams. And I think Byron Murphy would have fit the Giants way better than DeAndre Baker. And they just didn't even use him in press man type of situations. The whole reason that you take him over Byron Murphy is his ability to play press at the line of scrimmage and lock somebody up on one side of the field. And the Giants had him in zone coverage, and he didn't know the playbook. It was one thing after the next with DeAndre Baker. I would almost not even be disappointed to see him off the team. And even though he took strides near the end of the year, it's just a saved headache at this point. I don't want Eli Apple all over again. And that's where it looked like it was going.
So you're on board right now. It sounds as if you would not be against moving on from DeAndre Baker at this point.
No, I wouldn't be.
Yeah. I agree with you. Also, he definitely did not fit the Betcher scheme. The Betcher scheme played a lot more zone coverage, something that he wasn't accustomed to. Like you said, he was a press corner, and that was, I guess, the hope going into this year for me. I was optimistic about Baker going into this year with the new scheme because Patrick Graham runs a lot of man, and I thought that would fit DeAndre Baker's skill set better. And I thought he was going to be the X factor of this defense. And I kind of want to get into that now, what you think of this year's team, some of the guys they brought in. And let's start there. Let's just say they cut DeAndre Baker, or let's say he goes to jail, which hopefully that's not the case. But let's say that happens. Who on this roster right now do you think fits in as the number 2 cornerback? Who's the guy that takes that spot?
It's such a tough question because I want to tell you Sam Beal, but I know that's not the correct answer because this guy just can't stay on the field. We really don't know what he's capable of, but when you look at the depth chart about who would probably step into that role, that is probably the only other boundary corner the Giants actually have. Because if you want to count Julian Love, he's more of a safety or a nickel corner. I know he played on the boundary at Notre Dame. That's not really his skill set. So Julian Love, I think you cross off the list. He's not your boundary guy. It isn't Darnay Holmes, who, even though he played the boundary at UCLA, he's a nickel corner based on his size and traits. And Grant Haley is another nickel guy that can't play on the boundary. So the Giants don't really have a true boundary option other than maybe Sam Beal, and that guy has never really even played and didn't even look particularly well last year when he finally got on the field. So I don't know who the Giants' second cornerback really is. It's a weird personnel group that they have. I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you.
Yeah. Now, so it sounds to me if you were the Giants general manager right now, you would possibly look to free agency to bring in somebody to at least man the fort for a year.
Yeah, maybe Logan Ryan. It seems like
he's a nickel guy though. He's a nickel guy too.
Well, he has experience playing on the boundary, like in New England, for example, and even in Tennessee he did that. So even though he has experience on the inside, he's definitely someone that can play on the boundary, I would say, more so. And definitely his size profile fits more than a Grant Haley or a Darnay Holmes, for example.
Yeah, Grant Haley doesn't fit anywhere. That guy can't cover. He's a good tackler, very good open field tackler, but he can't cover. Now, what do you think about, I think it's Carr. What do you think about him? I think he's 33, 34.
Brandon Carr?
Yeah, I think, but he's an interesting guy. The guy's very durable. I'm talking about as a one-year Band-Aid if you're going out in free agency. That was a guy I had my eye on. Not that he's great, but he's a guy that can fill.
There are worse options because, I mean, when you look at this in the real scheme of things, it's like you're not going to go out there and sign a top corner in the league. You're looking at average and a good, stable veteran. And Brandon Carr was someone who was terrible in Dallas and then just kind of got better over the course of his career. I know he was solid in Baltimore. I'd be okay with that. He'd be, probably give me a few headaches in some games. But he'd be better than a lot of other options.
Yeah, no, 100%. And when you look at this New York Giants team now as a whole, we haven't talked much about the offense. Let's talk about the draft first off. The Giants, they did what I wanted them to do. I don't know what your opinion was in the first round. I was always outspoken about going with the tackle at number 4. I thought when you invested what you did at the quarterback and the running back position, I always thought they were taking the tackle, being that, like you said, Nate Solder were going to be moving on probably after this year. They're probably going to cut him. I think he only carries a $6 million hit. So I knew in my heart that they were probably going to go with tackle. I was happy that they did, and I was also happy that they addressed 3 offensive line positions in the first 5 picks. I'm very on board with Parrott. I like the Darnay Holmes pick. But what do you think about this offense this year based off of what they did in the draft and what they did in free agency, and maybe, I guess, just the growth of some of the players on this team? What do you think about the offense this year?
I mean, I don't think the offense was ever even the problem. Even last year, this was a team that showed they were capable of putting up points, even if they had a cupcake schedule for the most part. But they showed flashes, and there were a lot of young players. And when you look at this offense on paper, it certainly looks better than average.
Yeah.
Daniel Jones at least looks to be about an average quarterback right now, or at least trending in that direction. Saquon's one of the best running backs in the NFL. You look at their receiving core, it isn't particularly dynamic. They have Sterling Shepard, who might be forced to play on the outside because Golden Tate is a more traditional slot player, and that's where he can be effective. And then Darius Slayton is your one true outside receiver, even though he's more of a Z than an X. He's going to be in that role. And he looked fantastic last year at times. So the Giants have 3 weapons at receiver that are solid options. And then at tight end, Evan Ingram is a dynamic playmaker when he's actually on the field, although that seems to be few and far between a little bit.
Yeah.
And then their offensive line seems to be trending towards above average. I knew they were going to take a tackle. I agree with you. I know a lot of Giants fans had their heart set on Isaiah Simmons, and I think that would have been a really solid pick for the Giants at 4. But I knew this was going to be a tackle. More so that Dave Gettleman is making the pick, but you got to protect your young QB. And the Giants had 2 holes at tackle because Nate Solder is a revolving door.
Yes, he is.
And then at right tackle, there was nothing else going on as well. I want to say Nick Gates was in that role, and then Chad Wheeler previous to that, who was terrible before he got cut.
Remmers also, they got rid of him.
Yeah, Mike Remmers, that's true. Mike Remmers was a disaster.
Yeah.
Forgot about him, and that's not easy to do. But yeah, they definitely improved their offensive line. I don't think Pert's the guy that starts right away, but he could. They don't have a lot of other options there.
What about Fleming? They got Fleming.
Yeah, with Cam Fleming.
Yeah, Cam Fleming.
Yeah. Not ideal. Yeah. But I don't know. Andrew Thomas was my 4th best tackle in the draft. He was solid at Georgia. I think it was almost to pick him because the top 4 were so talented. It really depended on what you wanted to take because Jedrick Wills is a right tackle, or at least that's what he played at Alabama because of Alex Leatherwood, who was Alabama's left tackle for the past couple seasons. And that kind of checks him off the list maybe if you're looking for a left tackle to replace Nate Solder, even though they needed to address right tackle more so for this next season. Maybe Nate Solder slides over there and Andrew Thomas plays on the left side. I think that would be better.
Yeah.
And then you had a bunch of other guys who had some question marks. Tristan Wirfs, great athlete. Another guy who wasn't particularly amazing at Iowa, showed flashes. Another guy that played on the right side. So if the Giants wanted to address pure left tackle, they probably got the best guy for them in the draft. You knew it was going to be tackle, and they went out there and they got him.
Yeah. I think it was the safest of the picks. Like you said, Mekhi Becton, I think, had a lot of upside due to, just he's an imposing force. The guy's got huge, long arms. He's 6'7", 370 or whatever.
6'8" even.
6'8", yeah, whatever he is. He's huge. And he's definitely a guy with a lot of upside. There's no doubt about it. I think the Jets got good value there at number 11. But I think Andrew Thomas was the safest. I didn't think they were going to take him because everything you heard leading up into the draft was Wills and Wirfs. And I was completely fine with Wills. I was completely on board with Wills. And I thought he'd translate fine into a left tackle. He was the blindside protector for Tua. And I thought he would have stepped in for the Giants and done fine had they selected him. I had it ranked Wills, Thomas, Wirfs in terms of guys that I wanted the Giants to bring in. And when they took Thomas, I was ecstatic. He's safe. I think at worst you're going to get a top 8 to 10 tackle in the NFL for the next 15 years. And that's incredibly valuable for a young quarterback like Daniel Jones. So I thought it was the right move. I think this offense has the makings of potentially a top 10 offense in the league this year. I think it could be. We talked about Jason Garrett. I want to get your thoughts on the receiving core, tight end included here, on how you think they fit in the Air Coryell offense, which they're going to at least somewhat implement with the New York Giants. How do you think these guys will fit with Garrett's offense?
Well, if you look at what Jason Garrett has done in the past, it really has been tight end. Jason Witten was so productive for so many years for the Cowboys. Even if he was not a particular red zone threat, wasn't the guy that scored a ton of touchdowns for the Cowboys, is a guy that, ate up yards and was a constant threat to pick up first downs when they needed it. And Evan Ingram is a completely different type of player than a Jason Witten. So it'll be interesting to see how they utilize him. I've been a big advocate for playing Evan Ingram in a big slot role for a while now. That's where he was so effective at Ole Miss. And the Giants showed that they were willing to do that in certain scenarios and wanted to play him in a more traditional tight end role in others. So I'm not exactly sure how he's going to be used because he's such a joker, such a wild card that you don't really know, where they're going to use him because they can use him in a number of different roles. And he's improved as a blocker as well. So Ingram's a good player. It's so tough to evaluate him when he's never on the field. And that's a huge concern. With wide receiver, though, slot receiver has been another thing where the Cowboys really, really were able to shine. You look at Cole Beasley's production. I think Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard rotating in and out of the slot going to be very productive for the Giants this year. And then with Darius Slayton as a true deep threat over the top, the Giants have a lot of potential and a lot of weapons on offense. And Daniel Jones can definitely use those guys to develop a whole lot. So the Giants' offense, I think, can be a potent force in 2020. These guys just have to develop the way that we hope and think that they might be able to.
Yeah, and my theory on the offense is this. For this team to surprise people, and I'm guessing your expectations are probably similar to mine. I'm around 5-6 wins, and if things break right, maybe we could win 7 or 8, but I'm going into with the mindset of about a 6-win team. I'm
about the exact same, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people even have lower expectations. I think this team might even be better on paper than a 6-win team, but their schedule is just so challenging when you look at it. But we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But maybe we surprise some teams. But I think for this team to really win more games than we expect, I think they're going to have to be a ball control offense. I think they're going to have to win the time of possession because I think they're going to have to hide what their weakness is on this football team. I think we both agree it's the defense. And, you look at the Giants last year. I think they ranked 27th in the league in yards per drive. I think it was like plays per drive, rather. I think it was like 5.
Go ahead.
Yeah, 5.5 plays per drive. I think they're going to have about 7 or 8 plays per drive on average. They're going to have to flip it. I think they average about 28 minutes a game. I think they got to get to about 32 and keep that opposing offense off the field. That's how I think they're going to win football games, with Saquon Barkley running the football.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The defense is clearly the weak point here. And even though they've improved in certain areas, the secondary is still bad. We didn't even talk about Xavier McKinney, who I think was the best pick of the draft for the Giants. I was ecstatic when the Giants got him. I think he fits well with Jabril Peppers. Antoine Bethea was a disaster. They went out and they got a first-round caliber safety at the top of the second round. He's someone that can play near the box, and he can be that linebacker that the Giants haven't had. They can play him in that role. He's like an upgraded Landon Collins in a lot of ways. So Xavier McKinney can be a stud, but that doesn't mean the secondary is good because it still isn't. The linebacking core is still bad. Their defensive line is certainly the best group on the team, but maybe not a group that's going to generate a ton of pass rush. So they're solid. They could probably stop the run fairly well, even without linebackers. McKinney playing in the box and a great defensive line. But I think their secondary is still going to be exposed at times. Mm-hmm. And even with McKinney, who's solid, you have growing pains with a lot of those guys in that secondary who are young. James Bradbury's a more physical corner than he is a technician. So that could potentially lead to him getting beat over the top. Jabril Peppers, a little bit raw at times. We've seen him get beat on plenty of occasions. Xavier McKinney doesn't necessarily have that top-end speed that you look for. And then you have a complete question mark at cornerback 2 right now. So the Giants secondary, still bad, still could definitely get exposed. it's gonna be interesting. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and for this defense to be successful, you need a strong secondary. With the amount that I think they're going to blitz. They blitzed the Dolphins last year blitzed 35% of the time and 41% of the time on third down, which was the third highest mark in the league. And to do that, you have to have strong corner play. I think it's going to be interesting to see how they try to generate a pass rush because I don't think it's going to be you look at the Patriots last year. The Patriots last year were 7th in the league in sacks as a team, but they didn't have anybody over 7 sacks. Collins led the team in sacks. I think the Giants are going to have a similar approach. They're going to try to generate a pass rush through scheme, through blitzes, and through deception. So that'll be one of the more interesting aspects of the Giants defense this year. But I'm in agreement with you. I think they're going to have times where they struggle. Where I really want to see them improve last year, where they struggled mightily, was the coverage up the seam in the slot. I remember last year the opposing teams would always line up their best wide receiver in the slot, pick on Corey Ballantyne, pick on whoever was playing that slot position, and I'm hoping with Darnay Holmes, maybe you move Julian Love to that spot, maybe McKinney, like you said, get some time there guarding the seam. That, to me, is what I'm hoping is one of the biggest improvements on this defense because that was a big weakness last year.
Yeah, I would definitely agree there.
So we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. We have been doing this for over 40 minutes. I didn't think it was going to go that long, but I had an absolute blast talking to you. I just want to say thank you for coming onto the channel, man. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. You did a great job. Love everything you're doing over there on your channel. All my subscribers are asking me to do a Madden rebuild. I'm not the biggest video game guy, but
yeah, I mean, me neither. But it's just like the only way I can live out my team building fantasies as a general manager, it happens to be in a video game. I don't play any of the game myself, so if you're not a big video game guy, you don't have to be necessarily. Maybe one time we do one of those together. I don't know. I know nothing about it, but I've seen some of your videos. You do a great job. Very well spoken. I really appreciate you coming on. And once again, if you guys have been watching for the full 41 and a half minutes, if you haven't done so, please go in the link in the description below and check out Bengal. He does a great job over there. Man, thanks for coming on again, man. I really appreciate it. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You got it, buddy.